Okay. So, 19,000 years ago, in the Forgotten Realms, hundreds of elven high mages came together at the gathering place to cast a mighty spell, one that would create a new elven homeland where the elves could live in peace and safe from the forces of Lolth and Malar and the other evils that threatened them. The spell succeeded, more or less, creating the Isle of Evermeet, far off to the west, a green and pleasant land where they could live in peace. But Evermeet was born out of a tragic catastrophe. Such powerful magic was beyond the control of even these powerful high mages, and even as the new land was born, the one land, Faerun, was torn apart into different continents, giving its name to the largest of those continents. So Eliandrith of Orishar was an elven wizard of the time. He was not a high mage. He didn't participate in the ritual and therefore didn't die. But he was still attuned to the magical weave, and as the spell of the high mages spread, it rippled forward and backward through time, and Eliandrith saw two similar events to that sundering. And in this verse, he described all three of them as sunderings. His verse is actually why the elven sundering is called the Sundering, and it also pointed to two other events when the world was torn asunder. So the first one of those is known to historians as the Tearfall, and it happened 32,000 years ago when the world was dominated by the creator races and humans were primitive ape-like beings living in caves. One of the creator races was an amphibioid race called the Batraki, and they were embroiled in a war against armies of titans. Desperate to save themselves in this losing battle, they cast a mighty spell of their own, and they woke several primordials from their slumber. As primordials started to rise up and rampage across the world again, the gods quickly came to confront their ancient foes, and mighty battle ensued. Earthquakes, fires, and windstorms tore across the world, and as the battle drew to a climax, a primordial called Asgaroth, the World Shaper, took an ice moon and basically said, "If I can't rule this planet, no one can," and hurled it toward the world. Then the Overgod stepped in. Ao said, "No, this world is not going to be destroyed," and he created a twin of it. He gave the gods dominion over Toril, the old world, and gave the primordials dominion over Abir, the new one. There are ancient reports from a different creator race, the Saruk, that comment on the changing of the stars, but until recently, no one really understood what that meant or gave it much credence. Asgaroth's attack did not leave Toril unscathed. Continents were torn apart, and the world was devastated. The four inner seas merged together to form what is now the Sea of Fallen Stars. The dramatic climate change that followed pretty much spelled the extinction of the Batraki and gave rise to the dominance of the dragons. Scholars have long called this event the Tearfall and speculated that a comet or maybe an ice moon fell from the sky and dealt all this damage. But again, it wasn't until the return of Abir and the spell plague that the true significance of the event became clear. What is less well known is the role played in this event by ancient artifacts called the Tablets of Fate. Ao created these tablets at the separation of the world to stand as a barrier between the two worlds, to keep the gods and the primordials separate from each other and maintain a precarious balance between the two. In the immortal words of the novel Waterdeep, "On these artifacts," the Overlord said, "I have recorded the forces that balance law and chaos." The Tablets of Fate served as pillars to maintain the separations of the worlds, anchors for the mighty magic that Ao used to sunder the worlds, and a clear delimitation of the role of gods and primordials in the universe. So that was the first sundering. 14,000 years later was the sundering of Eliandrith's time, when the elven high mages used the spell that was actually similar in concept to the one that Ao used to separate the worlds in the first place. They were trying to tear the fabric of reality slightly to create this homeland, but they lacked an artifact that could serve as a focus, the way the Tablets of Fate had, and that's part of the reason that the spell ran out of control and dealt the devastation that it did. Hundreds of cities were washed away, thousands of elves lay dead, and the face of Toril was changed forever. That was for you, Ed. Still, the spell was successful. Like Ao's magic, it tore apart the fabric of the world and even the plains, taking a little piece out of Arvandor and plopping it down in the middle of the trackless sea to serve as a bridge between worlds and a homeland, a peaceful refuge for the elves. Then came the time of troubles. In 1358, Miracle and Bane stole the Tablets of Fate from Eo, believing that they could gain some of Eo's power. Eo called the other gods into his presence and said, "Give them back." Nobody stepped forward, and so Eo banished them all into mortal form to walk the earth. During this time of troubles, which is also called the Avatar Crisis, magic became unpredictable and the prayers of the faithful went unanswered. Now, eventually the Tablets of Fate were returned, but by then the damage had been done. Eo destroyed the Tablets of Fate, since the gods had clearly demonstrated that they didn't care anything about the balance they were meant to uphold. Again, in the words of Waterdeep, "The tablets mean nothing," Eo said to the gods, because the gods had made a mockery of their meaning. "I kept them to remind you that I created gods to serve the balance, not to twist it to your own ends. But this point was lost on you. You saw the tablets as a set of rules by which to play juvenile games of prestige and pomp. Then, when the rules became inconvenient, you stole them. Since the gods cared nothing for the balance they were supposed to serve, Eo destroyed the tablets and left them to their games. He destroyed the pillars that kept Abir and Toril apart. If the gods were determined to live in strife and upheaval, they might as well fight the primordials again. So the sundered worlds began a slow drift back together. From the perspective of modern histories, looking back at this event, this was the beginning of the era of upheaval. The Tablets of Fate might not have contained any of the Overgod's power, but on them were written the names of all their gods and their portfolios, the aspects of mortal life and the natural world over which each god held sway. When the tablets were no longer in Eo's control, the divine portfolios could shift around more easily, and chaos among the gods was the result. By the conclusion of the Avatar Crisis, Faerun's pantheon of gods witnessed the ascension of Cyric, Midnight, who became Mystra, and the Red Knight, the death of Bane, Baal, Ibrandul, and Miracle, and the death and subsequent rebirth of Torm. And once the Tablets of Fate were destroyed, the chaos continued for more than a century. Proving that they had learned nothing from the Avatar Crisis, the gods only stepped up their juvenile games of prestige and pomp. I have several things listed up there. It's really just a long litany of what has been going on in the Forgotten Realms. Cyric and Mask conspired to kill Lyra, the goddess of illusion. Velsharoon ascended to godhood. Bane returned to life. Lolth cocooned herself in the demon-web pits and emerged more powerful than ever, then set about consolidating her control over the Drow. The Mulhorandi and Untheric pantheons disappeared from the realms. In a single decade between 1375 and 1385, no less than 7 deities were slain, mostly of the Drow and Dwarven pantheons. And then came the Spell Plague. Cyric, who was aided and abetted by Shar, murdered Mystra in her own domain. The plane disintegrated at once and destroyed the god Savras and sent Azuth and Velsharoon reeling into the astral plane. Without Mystra to govern the weave, magic burst its bonds and ran wild across the world. And a year later, perhaps hurried by the effect of the Spell Plague, that collision of worlds became complete. Collision really is at best a helpful metaphor, because really the worlds intermingled, with regions and continents properly belonging to one world appearing instead on the other. So the Spell Plague began the second act of the era of upheaval, marked by just as much chaos as the first few decades after the Time of Troubles. During the century after the Spell Plague, the number of gods active in the pantheon dropped again. More deities died. Some simply left, and a few were revealed to be aspects of other gods, or else they just diminished so much that they merged into the essence of similar gods. Some deities lost so much power that they became servants to other gods, kind of taking shelter under the wings of greater powers. Wholly new gods, Zahir, appeared in the realms, and Asmodeus became a god in his own right. And even at the same time as all this upheaval was going on in the divine realm, the political realm was not much better, the geopolitical situation. Speaking of Lolth, the world of Faerun was shaken time and again by events from the Horrid invasion and the threat from the sea to the conquest of Sembia and the restoration of Mithranor. So, now the third and final act of the era of upheaval begins. The next Sundering, the third Sundering, our Sundering. So, is it possible for the Overgod to change his mind? Perhaps Eo has relented, realizing that letting the child gods run rampant has done more harm than good to his creation. Or perhaps he decided he had made his point sufficiently clear, and finally the dense, thick-headed gods would get it. Maybe he planned all along to end the era of upheaval at this specific moment in history. In either case, the gods have realized that Eo plans to recreate the Tablets of Fate. They know the plan, but they really have no idea what it means for them. They know that things will be different when he's done, but different gods have different ideas of what that might mean. Some of them suspect Eo is going to establish a hierarchy of power based on how many worshippers each god has when the tablets are complete. Because at the end of the Avatar crisis, he told them that's what they needed, is to build up worshippers. So they use their mortal agents, their chosen, to help them gain as many followers as possible in this last remaining sliver of time they have left. Others suspect or fear that Eo will be reassigning portfolios to get them clearly delineated, good grief, on the tablets again. So they imbue their chosen with power to exert the god's influence over his or her portfolio in the world, to kind of stake that claim. Some think it's pretty much the end of the world, so they're sending their chosen to make sure that their followers all end up in the right heaven when it's all over. By and large, the gods feel like they have to do something before the end comes, before the Sundering is complete and the Tablets of Fate are rewritten. So by the time that end comes, the tablets will be recreated, the worlds of Abir and Toril will be separated once more, and Toril restored to something akin to its former self. The pantheon will be reshaped and enriched once more, and the political landscape of Faerun will change significantly. Once it is over, the word of Eo declares that the era of upheaval is ended. Great stories remain to be told in this new era, but they are not the stories of gods and godlike beings. They are the tales of mortal heroes, taking a stand to preserve the world they love. They are your stories. So there is no single story of the Sundering. Countless stories emerge during the course of this dramatic event, stories of mighty heroes and of ordinary folks who are struggling to stay alive and defend what they hold dear. Against the backdrop of this divine drama and this political upheaval of the Sundering, we're highlighting 6 of those stories in novels. First is The Companions by Bob Salvatore. Then, The Godborn by Paul Kemp. The Adversary by Aaron M. Evans. The Reaver by Richard Lee Byers. The Sentinel by Troy Denning. And The Herald by Ed Greenwood. So in these 6 novels, we're telling the stories of 6 people, great and small, with their allies and enemies, as the great events of the gods and the chosen, wars and upheavals play out around them. None of these characters, even Elminster, can even see, much less determine what the end of the Sundering will bring, but all of them, through the choices they make, will leave a lasting mark on the new world. I'm almost done.
Woo, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So these novels are not the only stories to be told during the Sundering. IDW, our licensing partner for Comics, see now I'm lapsing into business speak, will be telling using comics to tell stories of other characters and other lands in this tumultuous time. Bob and Ed are working on 2 adventures we'll release next year, and they'll provide your characters with their own opportunities to make their mark on the changing world. Now I'm done. So with that, I will let our authors take over whatever you guys want to talk about.
I thought you were just going to say chapter 1.
All I'm going to say is that Eo sounds like a jackass. It's like, really?
Well, that's kind of traditional about these supreme.
I suppose that's
For
true.
these supreme power beings. Did you ever read Green Lantern?
Oh, yeah.
You know, the Guardians of the Universe, always wrong,
True.
always jerks. You know,
What's your
Thor
comment,
comics,
Anthony?
Odin, always wrong, always a jerk. You know,
Always
Even the
no.
best parents have
Yeah.
their limits of patience.
True.
I've left everybody speechless.
yes. Well, we're waiting for Bob.
Oh,
Well,
This is his first book, right?
Just start with you.
I'm really bad at talking about my own book, so I won't do that. But when I was invited to participate in this, I mean, one of the things that James said is that he wanted to kind of circle back to the classic feel of the realms. And the implication being that maybe we lost our way a little bit in that respect. And that was exciting. So when he asked me if I wanted to participate, I said, well, I indeed I do, very much so. So that has been kind of the theme, sort of the through line for all of our discussions and all of the emails and the story summit and everything else was like, what makes the realms for you? And we've all kind of worked on that thread throughout. And, you know, obviously it's subjective. There are some differences. Like for me, I look back, when I think of the gray box, do you guys remember that? They'd have like and here's the news things. Do you remember these? It'd be like, here's the news for Tarsus, you know.
I do
A
remember
merchant out
those.
of Sembia, Ed Greenwood, finds a dark elf body washed up in the River Rawvin. And there were just all these little threads, and it was rich, and it had this sense of wonder and this sense of adventure. And I'm talking again, and nobody can hear a damn thing I'm saying. And mysteries unplumbed and so forth. And it really had a kind of magic that's difficult to articulate, but that was present in both the lore and the novels. And maybe things got a little bit away from that, but I mean, I feel really good that they're going back in the right direction now.
Me?
Sure.
No, Aaron. No, Aaron.
in.
Aaron.
What?
Yeah.
No. Somebody else.
No, you're-
I'm on
you're-
my way up.
Yeah, you're the next book.
So say something.
We can talk about the characters, right?
Yeah, I mean, as much as you want to. We introduced your characters
That
last
feels
night.
very, like, oh yeah, as much as you want to.
Sure. We will grade you on your performance later.
I can tell the part that we were talking about at the Candlekeep Summit last night. Originally, they said, we want you to think about a human character. And I had started Brimstone Angels, and I was working on the sequel, Lesser Evils, and I had sort of invested in this storyline that I was really excited about. So I tried to come up with a good book with a human character, but it was really hard because, I kind of had something pretty cool, I thought, going. And what was even harder is that when I looked at all the sort of dramatic things that we were going to be doing with the gods and the countries, I'm like, wow, what I was going to do fit in really well. And when I came to James and I said, I can come up with another book, but I'm going to be really sad that I can't do my story because you feel like people don't want to hear about tieflings. He said, we want characters that people can relate to, and people that, humans look like humans, and elves are, kind of human, and people like those. And he said, but you look at your most popular character, and it's Drizzt, and you're going to tell me that drow aren't really friggin' weird? And really a little unrelatable, but it's because it's a good character, and it's a story you want to read about. And he thought about that, and he came back and he said, okay, give me another outline. Tell me what you're going to do. So now I have the weird character, the other weird character, I guess, because she's up there next to Drizzt. But so I really feel good about how she fits in and how it takes what happened in 4th edition. I think the thing about the realms is that you've got all that continuity, and something happens and it affects other things. So that stuff still happened. We have to blend it back in and make it feel like the whole beautiful, deep history of the realms is all seamless again. So I'm really excited about it.
Aaron was in kind of an awkward position. We had this story summit at Wizards last November.
He comes and he goes, it's November 15th, is that okay? And I said, that's my due date.
Yeah.
So I was a little early. I was on the phone. I was 4 days after I had my baby.
Yeah. Both Aaron and Paul had brand new babies at that time, so they were
That's
both
right.
participating over speakerphone, and it turns out that actually makes communication fairly difficult.
It was impossible. You can't tell who's talking. You can't hear
Right.
half of it.
Yeah.
Well, you can always tell Ed, because
That's true. You can always know it's Ed.
So it's always pretty clear when Ed's talking.
And Bob. Bob has that
Bob
accent.
with the East
But you
Coast,
can't
yeah.
see our gestures when we're doing this with the map and doing this to each other. You can't
Oh,
see
no,
any
yeah.
of
Well,
that.
you know what was sad about it when we watched the video yesterday at the presentation? Man, I wish I'd have been there because it was just rocking.
I
You
was
looked
so
like you were having a
jealous.
blast, and I thought, man, I'm just sitting on the phone. I was sitting outside of a Caribou. I'm supposed to be at work right now. It's just us talking, so I was playing hooky. I'm sitting outside in the parking lot of a Caribou on the phone talking to these guys. Going, man, I wish I was there. I wish I was there. Now I really wish I was there. But still, it was very constructive.
I was plotting to sneak down there. And my husband's like, you can't. No, you're not even supposed to be standing up right now. You can't drive down to Renton.
And I don't fly, so I'd have had to drive from Michigan to Seattle, and that would have been a chore.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a long drive.
That's a fact.
So also an interesting thing about both the story summit we did in November and the little mini one we did 2 days ago is that in both cases I went in there with some idea of the direction I wanted to go and how we might execute that. And in both cases, these guys came up with better ideas and we went with them. So it has been a great collaborative process of letting folks tell the stories that they want to tell and steering them toward a goal that we all agree on.
You know, in that respect, my experience was quite similar to Aaron's in that when James first contacted me about the Sundering, I had already put together a lot of what is now The Godborn, but was intended initially to be kind of book one of a trilogy, continuing the Aravis Kale stories. And, you know, they said, listen, we want you to do that, but we also want you to do this. And I said, great. And then we sat in on the Story Summit, and as that direction started to get established through kind of the collaborative efforts here, it seemed very, very clear to me that the story I had intended to tell in an entire Cycle of Night trilogy would really fit extraordinarily well into the Sundering with just one really big book. So that's how that shook out.
It's kind of cool because people are talking and they don't know what's going on in your
Right,
head or
right,
in your
right.
manuscript, and you're like, oh my gosh, but this and
Yeah,
this,
that's perfect.
and all of a sudden this is an even better book. Oh,
Yeah, that's right. So that was cool.
I think the one thing that we can say about all of our books so far, and I say so far because none of them are written yet, you know,
they're not finished.
is that they are focused down on their characters. You are looking over the shoulders of characters, and it's not going to be Galactus and the Silver Surfer and 15 gods sitting around. You're going to be down in the trenches with the people who are living through all that's going on in the Sundering. And there's going to be widespread chaos. And as you know, communications in the realms aren't always superb at the best of times. So it's going to be right down over the shoulders of the characters, as opposed to AO looks down and gives you the introduction.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I gave the sermon outside of the novels.
Yeah, I mean that's very much what my book is going to be for sure. It's when you were talking, when I heard you speaking yesterday, and you talked about realms fiction, and by extension all fiction being about moral choices, and I thought, thank God I'm doing something right, because because my book is going to be about characters who are having a very, very difficult time going through the chaos of the Sundering and are confronted with a very stark choice between ruthless pragmatism, essentially in the interest of survival, and clinging to hope and clinging to community, and how they're going to pick and how they will pick does have implications for kind of politics and the ethos and life in a particular section of the realms going forward, for the foreseeable future. And all this, of course, in the context of a kick-ass sword and sorcery adventure. And I'm going to create someone I think is going to be a very cool new hero who will continue on in further adventures. He's the kind of guy that I like to write. He's very going to be very kind of sardonic, wisecracking, resourceful character, good with a sword, kind of guy I very much enjoy doing. That said, it's going to be very much a story on the human level, and very much a story about moral choices. That said, by the end of it, I think you will see a couple aspects of the realms that I suspect a lot of you kind of missed, sort of coming back in, and then you'll kind of see, oh yeah, I'm really glad to see that bit back.
Well, this started for me when I got a call that said, hey, we're doing something interesting. We'd like to have you come out and talk to us. And I said, sure, I'll come out and talk. And I came out for the 3-day story conference. And we started talking about what they wanted to do with the Forgotten Realms, and in terms of returning it to the heart of high fantasy, which is what I've always loved about the realms. And by the time we got through with it, we were developing our story ideas, and I walked out of that with an outline that I was just chomping at the teeth to do. So, chomping at the bits to do. It was just a really cool process. And so the Sentinel is going to be the book number 5 in the series. It will feature obviously a paladin, embittered paladin, and lots of forbidden love. So it's going to be fun.
Oh.
Lots of forbidden love.
I might have to vet those scenes several times.
Love.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I should talk about my book, because it's the last one. Yeah.
Right.
And of course, as the last book, it's more up in the air than all of the others, because if there's anything that still needs to be said or done or shown by the time we get to book 6. Well, there's only one last chance to do it, so in it goes. But it's starting as a story picking up on Elminster, and you know where he is from the books thus far. He's burned out. He wants to die. He doesn't feel he can die without making sure that the weave is guarded or the realms will not be torn asunder by misuse of magic. So he has to have successors, and he's trying to train them. And of course, whenever he selects and trains a successor, that paints a target on them for everybody in the realms. And Storm is his sort of at his side for all this and feeling the same way. And what we're basically doing is telling the story of how this is going to affect them, all of this chaos and the Sundering. So we're, again, like I said earlier, we're all starting down at the character level. What happens? Well, I can't tell you that for 3 good reasons. One, because it's a secret. And one, because, hey, we want you to buy the book, so we can't tell you the whole story of the book. And the most important thing, because we don't know yet.
We have very thorough outlines. And outlines are prone to significant revision in the course of writing.
Well, yeah. It's like battle plans never surviving contact with the enemy. You have this nice outline, and the editor approves it, and everybody's smiling, and then you write the book, and it's nothing like the outline.
Every book I've done, I ended up adding a character that I didn't know I needed.
And having batted cleanup a couple of times myself, oh boy, are you in for it, Ed?
That's okay. It's magic.
Hopefully, we're getting a level of coordination with all these meetings and everything that will make Ed's job at least a little bit easier.
I'll just drink a lot. No, it'll be no problem. By the time that rolls around, we will have been running on the rails for so long that no matter how many cows they put in front of us, we'll just keep going.
What do you think? You want to move to questions?
Sure.
Love to.
Let's move to questions. I would like to suggest that you form a queue at the microphone there so that we can hear your questions, and in fact, everybody can hear your questions.
You have to speak at a microphone, too.
That's right. If we got to do it, you got to do it.
And we will make sure that it's on.
That would be a good start.
Make sure it's not too loud, okay. But for these books, will they be available as like a hardbound books or paperback? Because I know the more recent books are just all ebooks, if they're available.
These will all have an initial hardcover release.
Thanks.
Just a quick fanboy question. Just have to ask what's going to happen to my favorite character. What does the Sundering mean for Cyric? Who, last we heard, has been imprisoned in his home plane.
I guess I should answer that one, right? It should be me. All right.
Yes, you
I'll
should
answer.
definitely handle it.
Okay, I'll answer it as much as I
vague and
can. All right. In case, for those of you who don't know, I was one of the original people who invented Cyric with the Avatar trilogy. So he's been kind of a favorite of mine for a while. I wrote a book called Crucible, The Trial of Cyric the Mad, in which Cyric was restored to sanity, somewhat reluctantly, by his chosen Malik, who has somehow reemerges 100 years later to appear in the Sentinel, doing Cyric's bidding. So it will mean something significant for Cyric. I don't know that I should actually say what it is quite
You should
yet.
buy Troy's book.
Yeah, but he,
I said you should buy your book.
oh yeah. But Cyric will be in it.
There are
Not really
bad
as a
days,
character, but
and then there are
he's
bad days.
yeah, he's in it. He's a definite force in it. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
Hi. The other seminars have addressed the sort of the philosophy of the way that the Forgotten Realms is being brought back, and the way D&D Next is coming around to being very much influenced by us,
Right.
the gamers. and how everything that's going to be happening moving forward is going to be influenced largely by what we do. So my question is about the creative process here. So this is obviously not going to all come out at the same time. These books are going to come out with intervals and periods
Right.
in between.
I probably should have said that. They're coming out every 2 months, starting August of next year. So over the course of a single year.
Okay, so every 2 months. And so the question that I have is regarding the whole philosophy of the modular aspect of the game and the way in which the direction is influenced very much dynamically by our reactions. Your creative process as writers, my question is are your manuscripts going to be designed in a way to respond to our reactions to those earlier books? Obviously, Bob he's got to launch it, but as the books go on, are you as authors, are you going to be approaching it from the standpoint, well, let's see what people think of this, and to maybe sort of move it in directions that are in line with the philosophy of our responses? Or do you pretty much have a set plan in mind? And obviously, we want you to write what you want to write, but I'm just curious how the philosophy of us influencing everything is going to mesh with your creative direction.
Well, I don't think that comes into this so much because all of these books are going to be written before you see the first one.
Okay.
Part of what we're doing with the Sundering is setting up a world where you can make a difference more easily. We are setting up the stage for your characters to come on as significant actors again. There may be, so we're publishing 2 adventures during the course of the Sundering that can, as I said before, your characters will have a chance to make some mark on the world during the course of the Sundering. That won't necessarily be reflected in the smaller local stories that these guys are telling in their novels, but it may well be reflected in future products detailing those areas.
Yeah.
Sure, and I don't think any of us would want to do anything that would affect the direction of the books. It's more just as the authors just responding to our input. We're all looking forward to it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could say that your responses will kind of dictate or guide the direction of the world itself, and then the direction of the world itself is going to guide whatever follows from the Sundering.
Yeah, you see
that makes sense.
See your input in the books that come after.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say that I think I heard buried in your question is that as with D&D as a whole, D&D Next, we are trying to take as an inclusive perspective as possible, so that whatever you like about any version of the realms, you can find in some form in the post-Sundering realms.
Okay. Thank you.
I just had a question and a quick comment. First, a quick comment that Greenwood, I know, was memorable for Elminster and Salvatore, Drist. You, Mr. White, I'm always going to remember for the Lego Death Star that took, 3 days to build?
That's pretty hilarious, okay? My lasting contribution to Dungeons & Dragons.
And I was wondering if you're going to get more fan-based feedback before doing any major changes, because I was really disappointed with the death of Illustrae.
I think that ties back to the inclusive approach I was just talking about. Everything in the realms is loved by somebody. And obviously we can't have a big Forgotten Realms that exists in all times and places simultaneously, although I'm happy to say if you want to play a Forgotten Realms campaign using 5th edition rules in the 2nd edition era, I got no problem with that and will be easy for you to do. There are creative decisions that we are going to make that sometimes we won't be able to ask for input on. That's kind of the nature of the beast. But in general, we are trying to be better about consulting with the experts, many of whom are in this room and not at this table, and paying attention to the mood of things on the internets.
I have a 13-year-old son who obviously, like you said, you created 45 years ago when you were 6. So he doesn't have that background of Forgotten Realms. Will this be a good starting point for him to just jump in and be able to understand, or is there anything he should read before, or is it like a good starting point?
I think these books would be a great starting point.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Although I do also recommend you buy everything that I wrote that comes
Yes, there's lots of really good books.
Yeah, many of the main characters in these books have appeared before, and hopefully when your son reads Aaron's book, for example, he's going to want to go back and read the Brimstone Angels books because Farida is awesome. But
Thank you.
but he should be able to plunge into that book without necessarily.
He doesn't have to know.
No.
No. I mean, I think we're all making a point of writing it so that if you know these characters, you come in and you're like, oh, and now this is what happens. But if you're
Right.
just kind of like, Forgotten Realms, what's that? That you're not going to feel completely at sea. It's a tricky thing to do, but it's well worth it.
Yeah, it's added resonance if you know the backstory of the character. But one easy way to think of it is you don't have to have lived through World War II to enjoy a World War II movie, and nor do you need to know the backstory of those characters before they started screaming, yelling, and getting gunned down or flying the airplane. Presumably they grew up and learned to fly, but you see them at the moment of crisis, at the moment of tension, and doing whatever they do, trying to be heroes, dying in front of yours, whatever, and you don't need to know how they got there. You just know they're in the handbasket, going to hell, and you're watching, and then you'll see how it comes out at the other end.
I have two questions. Is that available? Am I allowed to?
There's nobody behind you, so go right ahead.
Get back in line.
You're going to ask 10. Let's go.
You just ask one and then turn around.
Okay.
Yeah.
First question, and I could be wrong on this. To the extent of my knowledge, AO has never manifested on the material plane in any of the novels. Is that a possibility with this, with him having a more firm hand?
Are you sure he hasn't?
I know, that's why I said I'm not sure. Okay, sorry.
Like I said before, I gave the sermon at the outset to kind of set the stage for all of this. I don't expect that any of these novels are going to dwell on any of that to a very large extent. Elminster is probably the only one of these characters who might have any insight into that at all, and I don't think even he has very much, although that's really up to Ed.
I view Elminster's relationship with AO, if any of you have ever seen Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, and Henry is romancing Catherine at the end, and they're just about to kiss, and the door's open. He says, "Oh, there's your father." Okay. Oh, there AO's in the building.
Sure. Okay. After the Sundering, after that all goes and it restabilizes and everything, where, as far as novels are concerned, is the Realms going? Because there was that 100-year gap.
Our plan is to keep moving forward.
I mean, I didn't know if you were going to continue to move forward and tell backward at the same time.
You never know.
The Sundering stories, the 6 stories, are they one-shots happening around a similar event? Or should we be reading them in order to get a larger story?
Thank you for clarifying that point. They are all standalone stories. It's kind of what this graphic was meant to represent, and I should have explained it better. The Sundering is the events going on in the background. Each of these stories is a self-contained story featuring different characters in different places in different situations dealing with their own stuff. You are going to want to read them all, not necessarily in order, but you should buy a book every 2 months and read it as fast as you can to be ready for the next one. Our hope is that all of these characters will continue on in many novels yet to come. Those who will want to read in order, read all
But
of
we probably should clarify that the order of the chronology of the stories, like Bob's will happen before Paul's, before Aaron's. I mean, so they are in order,
Right.
but they're chronological, but they're also standalone.
If you read them in order, you will get the best sense of the Sundering unfolding in the
Yeah,
background.
yeah. They tell the books together tell the story of the Sundering through these 6 people's eyes. So that's how you'll get a view of what's really happening in the whole world.
Right.
But each story will be kind of an individual story about this particular set of characters in this world or in this place. And as they see what's happening in the world will be presented through their eyes. So
Yeah, so they're linked by the event, and then we have worked through some small connections between
Right.
the books to make it.
And if you're already reading all of Bob Strist's books and following his characters, you're going to be following
Yeah.
right on into that first book anyway.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try and ask this so it can be answered non-spoilery, but can each of you think of a particular aspect of the realms, maybe something that we haven't seen in a while, but that you particularly championed in the course of putting this together?
Ooh.
I don't know if this really completely answers your question or not, but one of the things that I really wanted to see was the enrichment of the pantheon again. You know, more gods and some particularly beloved gods that went away come back, and I was sticking up for that, and you're going to see that.
I wanted to see Cyric here again. Almost slipped to a spoiler there.
Oh, trying to think of something nuts, but I'll just say harbors.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Magic.
I guess I wanted to complete, I don't want to say this without any spoilers, but I wanted to bring full circle the story of Kale and Mask and how that ultimately plays out. So that'll happen in Godborn.
I'm going to pass.
In the past, we've had the opportunity through a lot of the short story anthologies to see some of the smaller stories that go on around some of these bigger events. And I'm wondering if there are any plans for short fiction to accompany the Sundering.
That's right, I never got a chance to actually answer that question last night. There are business concerns that are really not my department, but as far as the plans that I'm asking for, that is something I would certainly like to do more with.
If you all gotten back like 15 or 20 copies of each novel, I think you'll make an anthology pretty likely. So, exactly. Insulation and whatever you want to do.
Decorate your walls, they're gorgeous covers.
You need to get Richard on your marketing team. Clearly.
That's right. I'm a fountain of ideas. None of them good, but.
I wanted to start with just saying that I'm very pleased by what I've heard tonight. In particular, the direction that you're saying how the realms will go from these large series of realm-shattering events into a series of smaller stories following the Sundering event. But one request that I would like to make, just something to keep in the back of your mind. Personally, I am a fan of the complete world of Toril, including continents beyond Faerun. And in particular, I know Troy Denning has written a couple novels that are set on the periphery of Faerun and even in the Karatur, and those are some of my all-time favorite novels. So I guess my question is there any thoughts, or I mean, I know this might be long-term, but is there any consideration for expanding beyond Faerun into some of the other lesser-known reaches?
You're right, that is a long-term question. One of the things that Mike said at the keynote last night is we want to make sure we get the Forgotten Realms right before we move on to dealing with other settings. And part of that is I've got a team of 4 people, 2 novel editors and a continuity checker and me. And if we were thinking about Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms at the same time, for example, we would go insane. In fact, we're already going insane. And even within the context of focusing on the Forgotten Realms, our first focus is on the Heartlands, really. We are looking beyond that, we're talking beyond that, we're not planning to do anything beyond that right away.
So I was just going to say that, I really enjoyed the history bit, as you might guess, at the beginning. And,
Eric and I actually went round and round and round about a lot of that.
But no, I'm also really looking forward to the stories. And people were talking before about, somebody new to the realms. And I can still remember when I got the map of the realms. Before even the gray box had come out, it was like tucked in that Dragon magazine. And I spent a whole afternoon poring over it, trying to figure it out. And just, how much magic there was. And, here we are, I don't know how many years later, like 25 years later. And, my daughter now is 10. And wanting to introduce her to that same sense of magic, you know, creating, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who were fans of the Realms who are now introducing a second generation, and having the opportunity through books like this to do that and to recreate the feel really sounds like a wonderful opportunity. So it's more of a comment than a question, but maybe what I would say is if it's possible to put maps at the beginning of the books, they often add to that sense of wonder. And I don't know if that's on the plan list or not, but something to make people go, what is that? And what is that? And what's that over there?
Here, more good maps.
That has been
Yeah.
discussed. I think I'm going to give away a little spoiler. We actually had a project going on in the office a while ago where we took the maps from the original gray box, scanned them, and had an artist turn them all into vector images so that we can use them at any scale. And that is our plan, to use those maps as the basis for everything we do.
Hi, my name is Brian. As a store owner with a large D&D play community at my store, many of them are kind of in wonder about what's coming with D&D Next, and they're going to be looking at these books and wondering what sort of implications they might have for their characters and their stories and their backgrounds and their themes as they move forward. I'm curious to know, is there going to be, are the materials that are found in these books going to play a role in those core books as they come out for D&D Next, or is it going to be separated still as it has been in the past?
The core books are not going to have, well, as far as we know right now, because we're not writing those books yet, they're not going to have setting information that is tied to a specific point in time.
Okay.
You will see in the encounter seasons at the end of next year, as we're releasing those adventures, the encounters and the adventures will be tied together so that characters in-store play, players in in-store play will have a chance to experience the Sundering in those ways. As far as what happens whenever we launch D&D Next is very hard to say. But it's probably fair to say that characters will have a chance to experience the realms in whatever state it's in at that point.
Sure, thank you.
Hear me? Sorry. With this particular time of, I guess, the past few years, we've seen a lot of rebooting of television shows, movies. Did you guys have a fear that, you might get the tag, they rebooted the realms?
I have a note here that I particularly wanted to stress that that's not what we're doing. We're not rebooting, we're not changing any past continuity. That was actually really important to us. We discussed it a lot, honestly. We looked at what Star Trek did and say, wow, that was really successful, but that doesn't work for us. Part of the reason that doesn't work for us is because of the canon we have and ongoing stories that we have no interest in stopping. And if we were to just go back to some arbitrary point in time in the realms, then, well, you kind of know what Drit's story is well beyond that, and how do you fit that in? Or if we go back and say, oh, you know what, the spell plague never happened, well, that's kind of a diss to all the authors who have written about it happening or having happened, and that's not something we want to do either. We want to respect the work of everybody who's written and worked on the realms before, and not dismiss any of it, even as in some cases we undo the effects of it.
Yeah, there'll be longer wait times at the airport.
You'll have to take off your shoes.
Yeah.
I think it would be hard for them not to be. Although I don't expect that that's an area we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in the short term.
Hello again. Last night you talked about how kind of your idea of going forward with this is, different ways of arcane, divine, psionic, stuff like that as far as magic is concerned in general. You said you were moving forward and that you were wanting to use all three. Now, since third edition, I believe, psionics has grown and become more popular. Will you be progressing with that? I've always been a big psionics fan. So.
We have a lot of ideas about how we might handle psionics in D&D Next, and nothing firmly settled yet. but obviously they're a part of the game, and people like you and many of us like them, and so there's got to be room for them at the table.
It would be pretty cool to put some psionics in Sentinel, don't you think? we can do that, can't we?
We can do whatever you want, Troy.
You see, I love working with these guys.
I'm quite serious. Send me an email.
Which is shorthand for convince me.
No. One of the things that we're doing is we're working on the rules. Actually, this is something I'm really excited about. As work has been going on about the tiefling race, Nina Hess, who's Aaron's editor, sends it to Aaron and says, what do you think? Tieflings are kind of important to you. Let's make sure we don't mess up your work. Similarly, I'm going to be sending her, or have you seen the Warlock already?
I've seen the Warlock.
Okay.
I sent you notes back on the Warlock.
Okay, yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Which is all, a big part of my job is making sure that mechanics and story sync up. And that is true in terms of making sure that our novels don't contradict mechanics and vice versa. And at this point right now, story is taking precedence.
Cyric wants psionics. I think that'd work.
What?
Yeah. Cyric wants psionics.
Yeah.
Cool. I did an interview with Salvatore not too long ago, and he mentioned the fact that he found writing in certain editions was easier from a novel point of view.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, he found 4E very constraining. He wrote one of what he calls a perfectly designed 4E combat, and he felt like he was shackled. Now, I'm assuming that these novels are being written in 5E format, or at least
They're being written in D&D format.
So I guess for each of you, do you
Is that fair to
do
say?
you think about the edition as you're writing these combats or these activities for your characters, or do you just do more of a freestyle? So,
I guess since I'm on the left, I've gotten in trouble for this before, but I really think of the rule set, and this is awful, cover yours, but I really think of it more as kind of guideline than shackles. And that said, I had some, unlike Bob, I never wrote a novel set in 4th edition, but I sort of was working on one at the time, and it was a little bit of a different process because there are some fundamentals that you have to work into the story, notwithstanding that I say they're guidelines. I mean, if you have Vancian magic or something like that, it has to be there. If you have these kinds of daily encounter and at-will kinds of things, those can be troublesome to work into fiction in a way that makes it compelling.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see where Bob might have said that. Like I said, I kind of caught a break in that respect. But so, I mean, for me, candidly, I try to ignore them as much as I can. I mean, I insist on the stuff that's mandatory so nobody goes, oh my God, Kemp doesn't know what he's doing. But then I really try to finesse it as much as I can so that it just flows. I mean, the last thing that you want, obviously, is for people to go, oh, well, look, he made his, pickpocket roll or something. Or, you know what I mean? Or, wow, he just used, whirlwind of steel or something like that. I mean, you want the reader caught up in the moment, and instead of thinking about a feat or a power or something along those lines, they're just going, holy shit, that was awesome.
Yeah, to echo what Paul said, the only time that in my realms fiction, that I have been doing game-specific was when I briefly, and we're talking before 2nd edition had officially come out, but the Realms was being published, I had a book department editor on a temporary basis. No, nothing to do with me. The personnel was shifting.
I was going to say, you've since had that person killed.
Yes, who wanted everything to match table gameplay, which meant, and there is an element of benefit in this, or if you take this philosophy, because as this person said, for people who hate reading and don't read, but they're gamers, they will now know the incantation for a fireball, and you'll have described in detail how it was cast, the verbal, somatic, material components. Same thing with lightning bolt. Just make sure you put in magic missile and all the cool spells. Make sure they all happen. The problem with doing that, and it's great fun. I did it, and I wrote it all into the novel, and they all got chopped out. All the four line rhyming couplets. I wand of bat and sulphur's reek, and the mystic words I now do speak. Where I wish to play my game, let the air burst into flame. You know, there's your fireball. And you know, the manuscript was now 4 times as long as it needed to be. And as Paul was saying, it began to assume what I would call the dread compulsion of a beginning writer's fiction. And then she got up, and then she went to the bathroom, undid the toothpaste tube, and squeezed just a dollop, and then she put it in her mouth and went from right to left, and then left to right, and you're going, come on. Okay, but the person is writing everything. So you shouldn't put everything in. The art of writing is what you put in and what you leave out and what you gloss over to keep the pacing moving, and what sort of pacing you need for that scene. And inevitably, if you're doing a battle and you're stopping to say, okay, here we go, this is a lightning bolt, everybody, and then for the next 3 pages you describe the magic user casting the lightning bolt, any pacing you had in that fight, well, you know, your reader is snoring. And the good thing about the writing process is, even if you don't have yourself or a family member as a first reader, you have an editor as a first reader. And if the editor's going, you get the message that, oops, this has to come out. And it does. So inevitably, you end up writing what works for the story. But as Paul's already said, you don't want to write something that people say, that's not D&D, or that's not the Realms. But you just want to let the story be forefront, not, did he check? Oh, I don't think he's read Unearthed Arcana, because on page 38.
And mind, the lore is different from the rule set, obviously.
Yeah.
The lore
Yeah.
is scripture. The rule set is an attempt to model behaviors in a game format
Right.
that you don't necessarily want to see come out in fiction.
The way that I've always thought about it is that the rule set is the lens by which you view the world,
Yeah.
but the world doesn't need
Yeah.
to change. But a big part of the reason for all of this is changing the world in response to changing mechanics, which is
Yeah.
coming at it backwards,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah,
I wanted to say there's a whole writer's symposium panel about this tomorrow
I agree with everything they said, and I won't say it again. But as far as your specific question about the difference, I found that 4th edition was harder for me to work with as a novelist, and the reason is that there are things in the play of 4th edition that I found it very difficult to translate into, you know, aside from issues of a game, you know, what would really be happening, you know, on if these were real people on a battlefield, you know, what does this represent? And for me, the most obvious thing I keep bumping up against time and time again was healing. In previous editions, I understood, you know, okay, the cleric can draw the power, positive energy down, which is the, which is the essence of life, it's in vitality itself, and he, you know, shoves it into the wounded guy, and it accelerates the healing process. And in a matter of moments, his wound is healed. You know, that was how I conceptualized it, and it made perfect sense in times. Then I got 4th edition is like, well, there's healing surges, and this warlock or this warlord who's 30 feet away from you, you know, can help you have one in the midst of battle. And I was like, I don't understand what that. I don't understand what that would correspond to in story context. So there are a lot of parts of 4th edition that I guess now it can be told, now that we're moving into D&D next, that I essentially treated with kind of a benign neglect. You know, if you read one of my 4th edition books and you said, you know, the way he described that sounds like a lot of like he was still writing in 3rd edition. Well, you know.
Just to add one voice on